That's it, big man. We're done. You won. Congratulations.
Oi, we ain't done yet.
This mustn't register on an emotional level. First, distract target. Then block his blind jab. Counter with cross to left cheek. Discombobulate. Dazed, he'll attempt wild haymaker. Employ elbow block. And body shot. Block feral left. Weaken right jaw. Now fracture. Break cracked ribs. Traumatize solar plexus. Dislocate jaw entirely. Heel kick to diaphragm. In summary, ears ringing, jaw fractured, 3 ribs cracked, 4 broken, diaphragm hemorrhaging. Physical recovery 6 weeks. Full psychological recovery 6 months. Capacity to spit it back of head neutralized.
The following film podcast frequently contains adult content, including foul language and descriptions of adult situations. Spoilers for the films discussed occur often. Listener discretion is advised. Now take it away, Dr. Rausch.
They must be destroyed on sight.
Welcome back to They Must Be Destroyed on Sight, episode 182. I'm your host, Lee. Full faculty recovery, unlikely Russell. Joined by my co-host, Daniel. Carried off into the arms of Morpheus like a caterpillar in a cocoon. Harper, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm even mostly sober, so this is going to be a fun time.
Yeah. And once again...
Temporarily, just to be clear.
We'll see. And once again, joined by our co-host, Jack. Dangerous at both ends and crafty in the middle. Graham, how you doing, sir?
I'm pretty good. I'm hyped up on the adrenal gland of a goat.
So we're going to be looking at the 2 Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes films, Sherlock Holmes from 2009 and Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows from 2011. And before we do that, we do have one comment to get through, so I'll go to that first. And this is just another spooky recommendation from Jeff Williams, and this time it's The Ghost Shift from 1943. Val Lewton produced thriller about a deranged ship captain obsessed with authority and his new third mate who attempts to impeach him. Expose him. I think he's making a... Yeah. The film seems more than a little bit relevant nowadays, he says. So there you go. Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that in 2 or 3 years when it will no longer be relevant, which is par for the course for TMBDOS.
But, next Jeff Williams month, because Jeff Williams month, which is technically this month, but that's already set in stone as far as I'm concerned. So we do have some selections from his recommendations. So, yeah, thank you, Jeff. That will be on the list, though. Now we can move to what we've watched lately. I know Jack and I have nothing. Daniel does have something, so I'll throw it over to you, Daniel.
I finally caught up with the Netflix Mindhunter series, and oh boy, do I have thoughts on this, which far more than we can possibly get into in this. It does kind of reiterate the thing that I said when we discussed Zodiac, the Fincher Zodiac, is that this should have been a TV series. I mean, ultimately, it kind of predated the sort of like prestige streaming television thing. But Zodiac should seeing, especially the first season of Mindhunter. It's like no, this is clearly what he was trying to do in Zodiac, but just only had 3 hours and 7 minutes or however long that movie is to do it. I definitely really liked the first season better than the second, partly because I've done a little bit of work digging into the Atlanta child murders, and I feel like the series. I don't know. I have complicated feelings about the way the series deals with it that I'm not ready to deal with at this point. I also, as anyone listening to this should know, I have some knowledge about what it's like to process the feelings of terrible people on a regular basis. And I actually have lots of thoughts about that. But yeah, no, I'm glad you had. I was kind of re-listening to one of our episodes where you had recommended it right after season 2 came out. And I kind of went, oh yeah, I'll start this off. And I was not unimpressed. Again, that first season seemed really interesting. The thing that I really like about it is this sort of dynamic that our 3 leads end up having, where they're all kind of like bright people arguing with each other about the details of what they're doing. Yeah. And the show doesn't really lean on anybody being like the one who's right. You know what I mean? Like, you don't get the sense that, there's one genius who's out there. Like, they all have kind of legitimate points to make, and they're kind of going in this real thing and trying to do this new thing. And there's a real question about, like, is this even valid at all? Which I think is something that's a lot more complicated. The second season, it ends up looking a lot more like a, brilliant but broken white male anti-hero show a little bit more. It starts to feel a little bit more generic to me, although I like a whole lot of what's going on. It loses some of that kind of interesting dynamic that we get from the first one. We spend a lot more time with the characters' personal lives, which isn't bad. I think there's some good material there, but I think they make some missteps, and I think, again, it feels a little bit more like something that I've kind of seen this before. But I am looking forward to seeing kind of where they go with the future. So, yeah, that's my opinion on Mindhunter until we decide to just completely do a series of television and just do the series as a full episode. But
before then, though, if anyone's actually interested in a good little podcast that covered season 2, I would recommend Duncan and Bo Come Correct. That's Bo Ransdale, who runs the Legion podcast network, and Duncan McLeish from Podcast Under the Stairs. Their podcast together, they covered that whole season, and it was pretty good.
Awesome. I have not heard this, so I'll have to check it out. In my copious free time, which I do not have enough podcasts to listen to.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you say about series 2. It does start to, one of the great virtues of the first series is that it shows you the John Douglas avatar. I can't remember what the character's called. It's a fictionalized version
Holden
of John
something.
Douglas.
I want to call it Holden McNeil. That's where Ben Affleck's character from Chasing Amy and stuff,
As long as it's not Holden Caulfield.
It
shows
on the scale of terrible Holdens in fiction,
Yeah.
Somewhere in the middle,
it shows you that he's kind of an asshole and he's wrong a lot of the time, and the others have valid points to make, and etc. And then the second one does start to look a bit more like he's the lone genius being frustrated by the mediocrity. The second series starts to resemble the pretty bad series in the similar style that they made about the Unabomber, where they heavily fictionalized the role of one guy who apparently was actually fairly insignificant, and make him sort of the only guy on the FBI task force that has a fucking clue about anything. Which in many ways it's the least of the sins of that series, but that's a whole other discussion. But I like the show on the whole. I'm far from an expert, but I have listened to the Atlanta Monster podcast, and I have to say, there are a lot of people on the sort of police's list of disappeared kids who weren't the victims of Wayne Williams, but it's clear to me that Wayne Williams is a serial killer who is responsible for a lot of those names on the list, despite his copious amounts of self-serving bullshit, which you will be served in enormous amounts if you listen to that podcast.
Well,
which you should, because it's very interesting.
It's very interesting. I re-listened to that podcast this week because I had listened to it before. And as I was kind of watching season 2, I was re-listening to that podcast. And I also have deep issues with that podcast. And so, if we want to do an episode just about That's like, I would be happy to sit and like chat for 4 hours about those kinds of things.
It sounds like it would just be me being schooled by you because you know a lot more about it. So.
Oh no, I don't know that much, but I'm fascinated with sort of like the way that the podcast is produced and like the sort of, I don't know. I have like anyway, well, we have to actually talk about a thing that is in the title of this episode at some point, and so I'm not going to dig into that. But
let's not get drawn into the irrelevancies of detecting crime,
right? Or the way that you might cover crime and the way that refusing to draw any kind of real conclusions in your podcast is something that is a problem.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, I very much agree with that spurious pose of, who knows? It's a big mystery thing that podcast is guilty of. Yeah.
Well, and it kind of draws out. It does the same thing in the second season with the Zodiac Killer, where they sort of advertise it as, "Oh, we're going to get to the bottom of this crime. We're going to explain this to you." And at the end, no, we're just kind of retelling the story, and it's retold well. But at the same time, there's no sort of critical judgment given to this stuff, and I feel like, I could see sort of a version of. I agree that Wayne Williams probably killed at least some of those kids, but I could see a version of reality in which he didn't, based purely on the fact that sorry, we're again way afield, but the fiber analysis guy is he's so no, this is a completely unique carpet fiber. Nobody ever found another carpet fiber like this one. Whenever I hear somebody who's that certain about it, this is the one piece of evidence that's used to it feels fishy to me. And the fact that the podcast host doesn't kind of push back on that just a little bit more. Also, and I just kind of don't believe anybody in that story ultimately,
It is one piece of an enormous amount of, it's all circumstantial, but when you get that much circumstantial evidence all pointing in very much the same direction. And
there's DNA evidence that that kind of came out since and all this sort of thing. Again, we're getting way deep into something that we shouldn't be talking about on this podcast, but I re-listening to it, I get even more frustrated. And the whole thing about profiling and the way it's misused and the way that that's also plays into the Mindhunter series. I don't know. This gets into deep philosophical questions about why we do the thing we do in some ways. And I feel like that's I don't know. I feel like there's a conversation there and I can't find anyone else having it online. So I'm going to spew it out on this podcast for people to listen to. That's
welcome to A&E's American Crime.
Yeah, that's right. We need another true crime podcast. The world is very short of podcasts that discuss true crime.
Because that's actually the one. That's actually the one episode of that old A&E series I actually remember because it used to play all the time on Saturday afternoons and stuff. Was that episode of A&E's American Crime or wherever the fuck it was? It was the Atlanta child murders. So
it's an incredibly fascinating topic. It's an incredibly, it's like the podcast does the Atlanta Monster podcast. It does give you a glimpse into just how incredibly complex and socially and culturally significant. There's so much. James Baldwin wrote a book. I haven't read it, but James Baldwin wrote a book about this, and I understand why, because it's like this whirlpool of all these incredibly significant things happening in this. It's all these issues together. It's class and race and the former Confederacy, and then pedophilia and police incompetence and police cover-ups, and it's so dense with meaning,
Yeah, but well, we need to stop ourselves and take a break before we just do become the next true crime podcast out there in the legion of them. And we're going to talk about more crime, but fictional crime. And we're going to be back after these messages and some music with Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows.
Broadcasting from the cursed earth, the Psychosemanticast.
Let us face, without panic, the reality of our time. The fact that atom bombs may someday be dropped on our cities. And let us prepare for survival by understanding the weapon that threatens us.
To have an ignorant, thin-skinned megalomaniac who sends off Twitters at 3 a.m. if somebody angered him.
Neo-Nazis turning up in Washington, D.C. to have a rally saying Heil Trump.
We talk about politics.
I knew I couldn't trust you corporate greaseballs!
We talk about movies.
You can't come down here and arrest people just because of what they look like. Are you crazy? But that's police harassment.
We talk about political movies.
We're in trouble. The whole world's in trouble. They're all around us and we never knew it. You can only see them with these special glasses.
The Psycho Semanticast.
All right, we're going to talk about these two movies sort of together, so I'm just going to quickly go through the cast and synopsis for both of these as quick as I can anyway.
If only there were more Italian people in these casts. That would be,
You go fuck yourself. Or like seriously, go fuck yourself.
I have a request. Someone I want to see. Sherlock Holmes. You and I are bound together on a journey that will twist the very fabric of nature. Allow me to enlighten you. Tomorrow, the world as you know it will end.
Well, there isn't any time to waste then, is there? It does make a considerable difference to me having someone with me on whom I can thoroughly rely.
It was nice to see you, Watson.
Lord Blackwood. The witness stated that he saw Lord Blackwood rise from the grave.
Going to raise a force that will alter the course of the world.
He's just as brilliant as you are, and infinitely more devious.
We'll see about that.
Nice touch.
I was simply studying your methods. Should the authorities ask me to hunt you down.
Holmes, leave the case alone.
Case for your good. Save your bullets, Watson.
What was that about saving bullets?
First point of attack, right ear. 2, throat. 3, cracked ribs. In summary, neutralized. You've never complained about my methods before?
I never complain. When do I complain about you practicing the violin at 3 a.m? Your general lack of hygiene, or your experiment on my dog?
Just kill the dog. Again.
I wanted to change the world, but I'll settle for ending yours.
I wish you would.
Get that out of my face.
It's not in your face, it's in my hand.
Get what's in your hand out of my face.
They've been flirting like this for hours.
Are we in trouble?
Watson, you have the grand gift of silence. Makes you quite invaluable as a companion.
What do you see?
everything. That is my curse.
Oh, how I've missed you, Holmes.
Have you?
I barely noticed your absence.
I'm knee-deep in the single most important case of my career.
What are we up against here?
The most formidable criminal mind in Europe.
Professor James Moriarty.
If we can stop him, we should prevent the collapse of Western civilization. No pressure.
Who are you two?
Concerned citizens.
Mr. Holmes? I have a feeling you're in danger.
Are you sure you want to play this game? I'm afraid you'd lose.
Oh dear.
What? I agree, it's not my best disguise. You know my methods.
Shall we get to work? Your clock is ticking.
Do trust me.
No.
Did you just kill my wife?
I timed it perfectly!
Just follow my lead.
Make it count.
I'd say that counts. You do seem excited, manic.
I am.
Verging on ecstatic, psychotic. I should have brought you a sedative.
So Sherlock Holmes from 2009, directed by Guy Ritchie, of course, written by Michael Robert Johnson, Anthony Peckham, Simon Kinberg, Lionel Wigham, and Wigram, and Arthur Conan Doyle. It's interesting. They actually changed the writers for the second film. Totally different writing team, apparently. Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes, Jude Law as Watson, Mark Strong as Lord Henry Blackwood, Rachel McAdams as Irene Adler, Kelly Riley, Yum Yum as Mary Morstan, Eddie Marson as Inspector Lestrade, Hans Matheson as Lord Coward, Geraldine James as Miss Hudson, James Fox as Sir Thomas Rothram, and Robert Mallet as Dredger. I'll have some things to say about him, actually. The writers for the second film, Michelle Mulrooney, Kieran Mulrooney, and Arthur Conan Doyle. Added to the cast here, Jared Harris as Professor James Moriarty, Naomi Rapace as Madame Sisma Heron, Stephen Fry as Mycroft Holmes, Paul Anderson as Sebastian Moran, Thierry Neuvik as Claude Ravesh, I can't remember, Fatma Adoun as Manouche, and Wolf Collar as Dr. Hoffmannsthal. Wolf Collar was in one of the other...
yeah, he's the
Holmes.
King of Bohemia in the Scandal Bohemia, which I'm sure that's deliberate because there's lots of nods in these movies.
Jude Law, young Jude Law, was he not in a couple of the Granada?
Yeah, he's a very young Jude Law is in one of the Granada shows. Yeah, I can't remember who he plays, but yeah, he is.
So we'll go into the first Sherlock Holmes here, and Jack, what are your sort of general thoughts on this one?
I'm always surprised by how much I like these because it was like it's amazing to me that this first film is 10 years old now. But I remember I found out about it because there was like a trailer on the TV, an ad spot or something. It was like anathema to me. Guy Ritchie, Robert Downey Jr., Sherlock Holmes with loads of comedy in the clips, and to me that certainly at the time it was just kill it with fire, get the crucifix out, etc. Definitely not for me. And then I don't know. So I'm actually not sure how I ended up seeing this because it's not the sort of thing I would have sought out. I would have said to myself, yeah, not for me, not bothered. But I did somehow end up seeing it. I suppose it must have been on TV or something, and it happened to be on. But I actually, I really like this. I mean, I wouldn't call it a brilliant piece of cinema, although I think these are actually very well made films.
Yeah.
The production design is fabulous. The sense of place is beautifully summed up. I mean, it's very heightened, and they put their foot down on the accelerator, but they really do summon up the sights and sounds and smells of a past era. You feel very immersed in it. Some of the panoramas are wonderful. Yeah, I mean, Guy Ritchie, he's a very good director. These are very well made bits of cinema. There are things that Guy Ritchie could teach certain very well known directors like Tim Burton and Christopher Nolan about how to make cogent, visually and spatially coherent cinema. There really are, especially in action sequences.
It's almost like he's the guy who started off doing like super low budget stuff or something.
I really don't know anything about him, but the action sequences are beautifully choreographed. You always know where everybody is. You know what's happening every moment, even though the editing is very fast. They make spatial sense, which is not something you can say of a lot of films of this kind. I mean, certainly if you take who's that guy that does the bloody awful Transformers films? They are
Michael Bay.
Yeah, Michael Bay films are so visually incoherent. Michael Bay needs to sit down and watch these and learn how to fucking do it.
Yeah, that's the problem with Michael Bay. He has Guy Ritchie films that only scratches the surface of the awfulness of Michael Bay. Although I agree, he would be much improved by learning from really any filmmaker. Like, just see a film, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, you say that, but Christopher Nolan, for instance, is a very acclaimed director. Christopher Nolan just has no fucking idea how space works. You can tell from watching his movies. That is not something you can say about Guy Ritchie. These films make a lot of visual sense. Overall, I mean, there's lots to say about this, but I think the reason it works is that it's very affectionate and respectful to the original subject matter without being enslaved to it in any sort of way. And it's found a way of doing it today. That's obviously what they were. These are films very much of their time. They have sort of the marks of their time, the 2009, 2011, all over them. They have lots of tells that you see in lots of movies from that era. But they're obviously attempts to do these sorts of stories. I mean, they don't bear that much relationship really to anything in Conan Doyle, but the basic idea: Sherlock Holmes is a genius detective. He's got a stout friend, Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson has a wife in the wings, etc. And Lestrade is sort of the detective who teams up with them, and he's kind of incompetent, but they hang around with him anyway, etc. And he's, this is the basic setup. And what they've done is they've found a way to do these sorts of stories today. And they've done them with a lot of self-awareness and they concentrate a lot on the relationships. A lot of it is digging into how these relationships would actually work and what these sorts of people might actually be like. I mean, it's very heightened and comedic and over the top, but there's a sense in which these films do try to dig into what these people would actually be like if they weren't the figures that end up in respectable middle-class Victorian fiction. They allow Watson, the ex-soldier, to be a bit of a lad. They give him a bit of a gambling habit, and he has mates from the rugby club, and he likes to get drunk and stuff like this. And he's a bit of he can look after himself in a fight, etc. The things that are present in the original stories. Holmes is a bit of a bohemian, he's a bit of a slob, etc. They put that in, and they do it in a way that works today. It doesn't seem twee, and it just retains this feeling of affectionate respect for the original. You never get the feeling, as much as they change and as much as they heighten and as much as they make comedic and stuff like that, I never get the feeling from these that they're sneering at the old stuff, like they think they're improving it or doing better, or like the old stuff is some kind of embarrassing old twee rubbish that they have to renovate. I get a feeling of real. They find the core of value in the old stories that still translates to this very modern, up to date manner of storytelling, and it ends up that the final product becomes really a lot of fun. Yeah, there's a lot more to say about it, but that's my basic position on these, I think.
All right, Daniel.
I basically agree with all of that. I don't have the same familiarity with the original source material and the various adaptations that Jack does, although this project has made me much more aware. And the reality is that, like, I saw both of these films theatrically. These were kind of like big budget blockbusters that I enjoyed at the time. I remember, I mean, I've seen the first one like a few times over the years. I don't think I've ever rewatched the sequel until I rewatched it last night for the podcast. Okay, so technically I rewatched like half of it when we thought we were going to do this last weekend, and then like we didn't. And so I had to rent it again from Amazon Prime to like rewatch it. So I ended up having to rent this twice, which is less of a bad thing when there were local video stores and when it's like, oh yeah, give the biggest corporation on the planet an extra $3. Anyway, I'm not bitter about that at all.
Good, because I'm not apologizing. So
no, well, that wasn't, that's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Anyway, so I've always really enjoyed these. I always enjoyed the first one more than the second. Although, like, rewatching them, I really like the second. I think the second is actually kind of trying to say something about sort of the nature of the kind of Imperial War project and stuff. I mean, it's sort of like buried in this kind of popcorn fun movie sort of thing, but I think there is something kind of interesting at the core of it, whereas the first one feels a little bit more like just kind of the fun romp. I mean, it's got that kind of like science superstition thing, which was very 2009 new atheist kind of thing. There's a little bit of that kind of going on, and that feels a little bit more dated today, whereas I think the sequel holds up better. There is a third one apparently in production, although Guy Ritchie isn't involved with it, and I don't know how that's going to work. Yeah, I do love the sort of the slow motion action sequences. The like, this is how we're going to punch people, but we're going to do it like a chess game. This is not how real fights work, but it is how they work in this series. So it's fine. It's actually a lot of fun. It works well in context. I think the final battle in the second movie with Moriarty and Holmes, where like they're practically doing telepathy with each other, that felt super overwrought when I saw it in the theater in 2011, and it felt almost as overwrought when I rewatched it last night. Other than that, it basically works completely for me. Like it works in the film. I do think that the bare knuckle like boxing sequences remind me a lot of Snatch in that really, really good way. Like it feels like Snatch was the like, we're going to do this low budget, and then this was like, and now we have $100 million to play with. He
really likes shooting sweaty topless men fist fighting each other. Like he has a thing for that.
Well, and there's so much that like one of the things that I really love is like this kind of more bohemian Holmes, this more earthy Holmes, and sort of like part of what he's good at is just sort of interacting with people of all like kind of classes and all strata of society. In particular, he's comfortable with the subaltern class, which I think is a really interesting move to take, and something that is left out of a lot of these adaptations. The idea that like he would just decide, I'm just going to go and like be in a bare knuckle boxing match because I'm feeling depressed and I want to have a drink and I want to beat the shit out of somebody, and so like that's just what I'm going to do. The comfort that he has with that, I really like that angle on Holmes, and I kind of like Sherlock Holmes as kind of a gangster picture with like this kind of superhero wandering through it. And then in the sequel, I kind of like the idea that he's sort of this like avenging angel kind of going after the great powers, and he's sort of trying to kind of work against this war machine, which I think the second film is less than successful in terms of how it decides to execute that, but I really like the intention, and I really like that kind of angle on it. So I really do think these films are like kind of underappreciated. Anyway, sorry, Jack, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that thing about Holmes who can, mix with like the lowlifes and stuff perfectly happily. That is something that you get in the Rathbone ones as well. There's a couple of sequences in the Rathbone movies where Holmes will go into an East End dive, and he gets lots of dirty looks. There's people that, it's Sherlock Holmes, our great enemy. But then there's also like lovable Cockney thugs who say, "Oh, Mr. Holmes, yeah," and because he sent them up for something, but he also got them off a murder charge. So
or he wins their respect by telling them tall tales while he's locked up in jail.
Yeah, well, that's sort of like the modern version of what those Rathbone ones do, isn't it? In these ones, there's a wonderful scene where Lestrade comes to get him, and he thinks he's being beaten up, and it turns out he's at the center of a great load of guys telling them jokes. This is a very socially adept Holmes, which is kind of the opposite of the Jeremy Brett version. The Jeremy Brett version does connect with people of lower classes, but he does it,
but through disguise almost always, right?
Well, yeah, and he also does this in like there's a lovely episode called Silver Blaze where there's a bit where he's interviewing a maid who I think she discovers a dead body, and she's tremendously distressed, and he just reaches out very quietly and with no fuss. He just reaches out and he touches her hand, and it's like in the Brett version of Holmes, you feel like that's an incredible achievement. For him to and it's not because she's a maid, it's just because this Holmes is so buttoned up and repressed that he can't reach out to people. And by that point in the series, he's come out of himself to the extent where he can reach across and make that sort of human contact, which is part of the great stuff about that show, the way Holmes grows and does that over whereas this is a very gregarious Holmes who can basically swagger through any social situation with complete confidence.
It's a very American Holmes, right? Like it feels very coded American in a weird way.
Yeah.
Well, he's kind of Tony Stark without being a war criminal.
Well, and I think there's an angle of 2009 to 2011 that's literally Iron Man 2 happens right in between those.
Yeah.
And after this, he basically does 2 more movies that aren't as Tony Stark, and then since then he has not appeared on screen to date as anyone except for Tony Stark. So I think there's an interesting dynamic happening.
He gets into his Rathbone phase where he's doing nothing but Sherlock Holmes. I find it funny also that a lot of his disguises in these movies are absolute shit.
I love that.
They're way worse than Rathbone's disguises even back in the day, right? I like this. I was telling Jack before we got this started that initially I was very hesitant when I first saw the trailers for this, and I was like, oh, this is going to be shit. But I rented it anyway, and I watched it, and, I kind of liked it, but at the same time, I was still one of those sort of Holmes purists as yeah, we get it. There's jokes about Holmes and Watson being gay. Can we, get over this now? Either have them fuck or just stop joking about it? That was
the second film is totally queerbaity, to a degree that, it's practically text in the second film. Yeah,
I like it a lot more now. I like the fact that they're being jokey about it now. Before, I was just sort of opposed to it. I was just so tired of it, and then it's all kind of grown on me. The way these are done, they are modern in a very specific way, but at the same time, like Jack was saying, they do pay respect to the old stories. There's about 1 million Sherlock Holmes stories that are weaved in and out of these 2 movies in one place or another. Even if it's just an offhand reference, and I'm not even going to try to bore everybody with listing that shit, but if you're familiar with the stories and you watch these 2 movies, you'll be like, okay, yeah, that story. I like how this starts years into their career together. Watson's already kind of tired of him. He's like, yeah, we need to stop doing cases. I need to get my dick wet, and I need to get out of this fucking apartment with you.
The Watson needs to leave plot element really annoyed me on this kind of rewatch, just in the sense of, I get you're making sort of the 4-quadrant action comedy, mystery thing. I get that that's what you're doing, and you need a through line to sort of sell this, but also I just don't need that kind of thing in my version. Get married and then still hang out. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, but it's that you don't want to introduce your slob best friend to your new girlfriend kind of idea, right? And like I was saying, these are very modern interpretations. They feel like better versions of the Pirates of the Caribbean films, in a way. The way they're done is very very on the nose with that, and
especially when you literally have Robert Downey Jr. in blue eyeshadow during. He looks hot as fuck in that, by the way. There's no question.
He's got a real Bowie thing going on.
He does. He does.
It's funny. This watch, when he takes the wig off and he's just got the blue eye makeup and the red lipstick, I thought he looked like the Joker.
Yes, that's one of my notes. It's they really missed out. There was a casting choice here they could have gone with back in the day with him as the Joker, but so much of these films have grown on me where I've really come to appreciate them. The one thing I can't get over is the fucking slow-mo breakdown of the fights. I hate that shit. I fucking hate it. I just can't stand it. It's no, punch to the solar plexus.
I think it goes overboard in the second film.
Yeah,
I like it in the first film because it's so kind of deliberate. It's used very deliberately. In the sequel, where he starts doing the I'm gonna like breakfast is served, like sort of thing.
Yeah,
it feels sort of like a parody of the. You're right.
It's just in the second film, they back off from it for quite a while too. Like they show some fight scenes and stuff where he doesn't do it.
I was going to say, on this rewatch, there's a lot less of it than I remembered. Actually, I was kind of struck by how seldom it happens. I kind of went in thinking, there's too much of that, and then on this way round, I really was struck by they don't actually do it that much.
Yeah,
and contra what Daniel said, I really like the final confrontation between Holmes and Moriarty at the end of the second one, down to the point where you get Holmes trying to predict the fight, and then it switches to Moriarty's internal monologue where he's doing the same thing, and it's like they're having telepathy with each other, but it's actually just that they're anticipating what the other one is thinking because they're so alike and they're on the same level. And it actually genuinely gives me chills down the spine with that line from Moriarty, "Shall we stop wasting each other's time?" I think that's great because it kind of subverts that thing that's been happening throughout the two movies, because suddenly Holmes has met somebody who can do it as well, so it doesn't work. It just cancels it out.
They have to just to add on to that here, Jack. There's a moment earlier in the film where he, in the sort of like the breakfast is served sequence, Newman Replace just throws a knife into the guy. And like interrupts the whole sequence, which you can read as kind of Holmes's misogyny, although I think that's played down in this kind of version of Holmes, which I like a lot. I actually prefer it not being there in this.
Well, if you're not going to treat it, don't do it. If you're going to actually address it. If you're not going to address that issue seriously, just leave it out. And I think they do. And it's the right, because he does have problems with Mary in the first film, but it's just because she's taking Watson away from him. And he obviously loves Watson so much. He's got a problem with it. But they do leave it out. And I think it's pretty wise. If it's not going to be something they tackle seriously, just leave it out. Yeah.
But
just regarding that final sequence on Reichenbach Falls, it's less sort of the idea that he's sort of met his match, which seems pretty clear and good and obvious, and more sort of the execution just feels a little bit like they're literally like speaking to each other in their minds, which feels like less, I don't know,
it's too cute for me. Like it's just like, look how clever and witty we're being right now on the screen in front of you. Like it feels like, okay, Guy Ritchie has managed to stop from wanking all over the screen for a while, and now he's just gonna blow his load at the end at the last scene.
It works for me. It works for me because it makes Moriarty really formidable.
Sure. No, I don't agree. I don't disagree with that. I just feel like maybe if you got like sort of instead of like the fight scene happens to like the halfway point and then you hear Moriarty's kind of version of it, if we kind of got like Holmes's version and then Moriarty's version, like kind of from the beginning separately, like I really feel like it's just a question of execution. And I feel like I also sat and watched this at the time in theaters and felt like, this just feels really like sort of the dumbed down version of what we're seeing.
I feel like it would have worked for me a bit better, and like I don't hate it or anything, but I'm like, it's pretty cute for it's a little too cutesy.
I mean, it's ultimately like 90 seconds out of a 4-hour film.
I feel like it would have worked better if they sort of pulled from the they do the confrontation scene, and they do have a couple lines from the final problem in that, right, where they're both talking to each other and everything, and it's like they have that line like you've already thought about everything I could possibly say to you or whatever, I feel like it would have been better suited if there was just a quick little monologue from Moriarty where it's like, I already know what you're thinking. He just tells Holmes flat out, I know how you see this going down. And then they just start fighting. And then, maybe you can have a quick little break in the Holmes mind where he has a little inspiration where it's like, I've got to improvise here. And then he does, But otherwise, it's a little too cute for me. But
no, you're both wrong. It's good. It does kind of illustrate what I was saying about, because you're right. They do bring up those lines from the final problem where, Moriarty or Holmes, I can't remember who it is, says, everything I have to say has already crossed your mind, and my answer has already crossed yours. That's kind of so what they're doing there is they are taking something from the original text and they're making it work in this very modern style. And I think, I mean, you could do it a bit more restrained, but I think you got to if you're going to get stuff like this to work, you've got to put your pedal to the metal a bit.
I guess. I mean, it does fit the energy of the second movie totally, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. But I also like,
and I can say people who see themselves as supervillains absolutely do taunt the people that they see as after them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
not out of any personal experience or anything. But
what do you think of the villain for the first movie, though, Blackwood? The first thing that struck me, and I like Strong as an actor. I think he's underrated character, bad guy that pops up in stuff and pops up in a lot lesser stuff than he should be in. And I think he's pretty good in this. Although the first thing that struck me is like, oh, this is what Holmes looks like in every other adaptation of the fucking.
Yeah, he looks like Jeremy Brett.
Yeah.
I like Mark Strong. Again, I mean, it's fine. I don't think Blackwood's a particularly good villain, and it's a bit of a nasty thing to say, but I think a lot of it is Mark Strong's performance, because he is a bit blank, and he does do it very much as just he just does a very much a villain performance. You know,
kind of plays it as kind of like a typical bad Dracula performance.
Yeah, and a bit Hannibal Lecter-y in the prison cell and stuff like that. And I mean, to be fair to him, he hasn't got a tremendous amount to work with. But yeah, I think the Blackwood of the villain is one of the places where the first film falls down a bit for me, I have to say.
Yeah, and also, and here's the thing, it's just another sort of modern thing with this, where these are big rollicking like adventure films, and they're not really detective films in the strictest sense. That kind of bothers me a little bit about these. Is like, I'd rather see Holmes and Watson solve problems in a case as opposed to go on these big grand adventures. Yeah. But, still these films are entertaining enough where it kind of washes over me at the same time.
You do. I was struck rewatching these. Like, what would these look like if they had like a third of the budget? Like what would the smaller, like, as much as I like the way these look and feel, and I do enjoy these as kind of big blockbuster entertainment, it would be interesting to see what Guy Ritchie would have done if, like, instead of $100 million, you had $30 million to like do the same kind of movie. I think it would be sort of not the thing that we're seeing, but I think it would in some ways be more interesting.
Goes to that same question of like, what would a Batman movie look like at 30 million instead of like 200 million?
Well, I was struck by like the Sherlock series. Like, I would so much rather, like, not that we need to like keep relitigating this, but giving it to Guy Ritchie or giving it to like some, like, the people on this production and saying like, let's do sort of a gangster picture version of like a modern day Sherlock, like make Snatch, but it's, Sherlock Holmes as sort of the lead, like kind of delving through the like modern, as of like the time, kind of London underworld.
And
like,
what's Jason?
How amazing would that series be, right?
Hey, like, what's Jason Statham doing right now? You want to play Watson?
Jason Statham, I would accept as Lestrade, as a sort of modern.
That actually works real well.
Yeah.
I'm thinking
Can we get him to grow a
right
mustache? Yeah.
I'm thinking about him in Snatch right now, walking around with his big trench coat.
D.I. Lestrade. Yeah, that could work. I've never seen a single episode of Sherlock. But I have seen the last few years of Doctor Who, and I have seen Jekyll. Written by Stephen Moffat.
You're one of the four, right? Have you seen Jekyll?
I get the feeling that whereas these movies are affectionate and respectful, even through the jokes and the ribbing and the self-awareness, maybe that's not true of Sherlock. I don't know. Maybe Sherlock is more the sort of thing where you get the feeling that the people writing it kind of have a condescending, patronizing attitude to the original source material, and they think the thing to do is to smear their own shit all over it because that's inevitably going to be a lot cleverer.
Are you sure you've never seen an episode of Sherlock? Because that's exactly what that series.
Mind powers.
Yeah, because that's exactly what that
he
fucking
and Stephen
series
Moffat
does.
are in a battle over a chess game.
Yeah,
over Reichenbach Falls.
Well, if I could be sure of taking Stephen Moffat with me, then I would cheerfully accept.
Well done.
Why does it always come back to poor Stephen Moffat, honestly?
Well, he brings it on himself, really, when you think about it.
He kind of does, doesn't he?
Yeah.
If he could stop making terrible television, we'd be happy to praise him, honestly.
Yeah, if he just stopped making TV, I could... stop going on about the TV he makes.
Yeah. Oh wait, he's doing Dracula now, so
oh god,
we're not going to have any opinions about that for sure.
No,
no one here has any connection to the history of the Dracula mythos.
Basically the man isn't going to be happy until he and Mark Gatiss have smeared their shit all over everything that I love. So I confidently expect them to come home one day and find them in my lounge, smearing shit all over my cats and my books and things. Never mind.
He's gonna make his new series Up with Adam Smith. Will be,
no thanks.
Thomas Piketty for the win will be the next. That's a joke that absolutely no one will get, but Jack understood what I was doing. But
yeah,
his new series is going to be Hayek, starring Jason Statham. There you go. Not that I love Hayek, but you know what I mean.
I'm glad this is really funny for somebody.
Yeah, 2 or 3 people are going to get this. It's going to be very. It's more important to be. It's more important to be very funny for a small number of people than to be a bit funny for a larger number of people.
I think Daniel's going to die, right? Like I'm watching right now, and he's getting really red.
I'm just imagining the Hayek series. There's Stephen Moffat.
Okay.
I think I've hurt him.
Someone will have to explain this to me later on. I'm just gonna move into some trivia for the first film, and we can kind of move away from that because plot-wise, there's not a lot to talk about in the first film. Like, there's just kind of a couple of beats, but
we should at least talk about Rachel McAdams.
Oh God, don't Rachel McAdams. Wow, she's so good.
Yeah, absolutely wasted in the second film, by the way. Watson's line to Holmes, that what you're drinking is for eye surgery is an obscure reference to Holmes' cocaine usage because at the time cocaine was topical for eye surgery. And then the stories. Yeah. So that's kind of clever. There are reported references to 5 women murdered by Blackwood, and that kind of just is like a stand-in for Jack the Ripper because, same time frame kind of thing. So I did like that they kind of like tied that in. Although they didn't explicitly do it, but it still has like the sort of it's not the Masons, it's another society or something like that, but it's still like it goes into that sort of Jack the Ripper was a Freemason and all that kind of stuff.
It's another one of those references. As I say, there's lots of references in these. Like the thing with Holmes charming flies with his violin, that is a direct lift from one of the Basil Rathbone movies. One of the shots of Baker Street is almost exactly like the opening shot from the Jeremy Brett series opening titles. The thing about this sort of pseudo Masons and almost Jack the Ripper, that's very much a reference to Murder by Decree, I think.
Yeah. And Colin Farrell was apparently in talks to play Watson before Jude Law was cast. So, yeah,
I think Jude Law is perfect in this.
He is. Yeah. I was telling Jack offline as well that I'm kind of like thinking Jude Law is my favorite Watson out of all the adaptations. Even though, I think there's maybe ones that are true to the character. I just really like what he does with Watson. It's just fun.
I just love a Watson who can throw a punch. I love a Watson who feels like he's equal to Holmes.
Yeah.
Kind of doing his own thing. He can't do the deductive powers, but he can do it well enough to sort of support Holmes and kind of question Holmes, but also has this sort of martial prowess that even Holmes with his sort of magic deductive superpowers doesn't always he needs backup, and that's where Watson comes in.
Also, Watson doesn't put up with fucking Holmes bullshit. It's just
no.
At one point he's just so mad at Holmes and Holmes is just going into one of his spiels while they're in the hansom and he just punches him in the fucking nose. He's just he's like, shut up. And then he has a nice smile afterwards.
And the medical knowledge, which comes into play in a really serious way in the second film. So, there's much more of a back and forth, I think, in these movies. With Watson and with Mary, who gets some nice stuff. Particularly in the second film.
You can't just do it straight anymore. You can't have Watson, the jolly good chap who's basically just there to follow Holmes around and say, "Oh, Holmes, that's amazing." And Mary is just this little woman who's in one story and then dies conveniently. Audiences just won't accept stuff like that anymore.
You can make Watson that if you're a certain creator who we've already laughed over.
Oh, right. Okay. I see.
Mm-hmm. So the second film's all about Holmes chasing Moriarty. He kills Irene Adler. I'm not going to bother reading the synopsis, but it's just good. And again, Jack and I were talking about this before Daniel joined. This is like just one big movie. It really is. It's just like a 4-hour movie.
Yeah.
It's Holmes and Watson in proto World War One.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It touches upon that stuff too. Like it touches upon the stuff that we had in like, what was it? Secret Life or 7%? I can't remember which one. The one with the Loch Ness Monster.
Secret Life.
Secret Life. Yeah.
And I saw that after I saw this originally, which
because it goes into pre-modern war.
Actually,
stuff.
I think I did see Secret Life first. That's interesting. Sorry, that's a. But yeah, no, this does that, but does it more properly. It doesn't actually do it properly, but it does it more properly.
Yeah, it doesn't go deep into it or anything. It's just like, oh, war is bad. Well, thanks. Yeah. Okay.
Well, the idea of Moriarty as a war profiteer is actually really interesting. The idea that like this is kind of where I land on like this whole like kind of Moriarty mythos is like Moriarty can be brilliant, but the reason that he's threatened Holmes is that he has like this huge like resource. Like he's not just like a crime boss going out there and running prostitutes or whatever. The angle should be like, no, he's kind of going into world affairs. He's moving pieces into place. He's doing something. He's profiteering in a way that actually harms regular people, and Holmes should be the kind of the advocate of the people, regardless of his various class positions.
I like and this is
but sorry.
Yeah, sorry. This is an aside, but I really like. I think actually my favorite way Moriarty was treated as a character was actually in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comics, where Moriarty was actually an agent for the British government. who was set up as a false crime lord, but he liked it so much he basically just became a crime lord, and it's actually kind of brilliant the way they did it. But
I think Jared Harris is just incredible as Moriarty. He's just magnetically sinister, and the incredible bit where he sort of indulges is obviously most of the time repressed sadism, torturing Holmes while singing Schubert's The Trout while looking at himself in the mirror. That's just fucking magic. That's villain magic. I love that so much.
And his other little moment that he allows himself is every once in a while he likes to go and feed pigeons.
Yeah, that's great.
It would be great if you poisoned them. That would be it.
But no, I love the depiction of Moriarty in this because you remember I said in one of the other ones that Moriarty's kind of ridiculous because the idea of this guy who's a university professor and also a crime boss is just kind of absurd. Does he direct his huge criminal enterprise in between doing seminars with his students and grading papers?
Yeah.
This film just completely leans it. Well, both these films actually just completely lean into this. In the first one, Holmes identifies him as a professor because he's got chalk on his lapel. And then in the second film, you actually go to King's College, Cambridge, and there he is in his Don's little waistcoat and his gown and everything, and he's teaching a class. He's in his classroom. He's exactly like a Cambridge Don, and I just love that. I love the idea of this guy who's just a Cambridge Don who also happens to be a massive crime boss. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. Don't worry about the fact that it's daft. That's exactly what it is, and I love it. And Jared Harris does it completely seriously, so it just takes on this incredible sinister edge to it. Just him pottering around in his gown in his room. It's brilliant.
Well, and he doesn't like. There's no sense of, and this is something that I liked in one of the Rathbone ones that we did, where there's no moment of recognition. There's no moment of Holmes like catches Moriarty and says like, "No, you're actually the guy." Clearly, no. Holmes shows up like literally on invitation, and it's like, trust you're going to leave my partner out of this. He's no longer a part of this. So it's like, no, fuck you.
Yeah, I'm going to kill him too, and his wife,
and his wife. Like again,
go on.
Personal feelings on that.
Yeah, no, and he makes the point of like, it's your fault. You pushed too hard into my doings, and now I'm going to end you, and I'm going to end your friends, and I'm probably going to kill them first.
you paid attention to what I do. That's crime enough for me to kill you and everybody you love.
You and everyone you love. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
Because he can't have loose ends. Like he can't have any loose end, and it's like even
well, it's
if
not only loose ends. It's like I'm going to go after them because, like, look, we're going to collide, and like this is just he phrases it as like this is a force of nature. This is just
he is like a force of nature in a way. Well, at least he thinks himself as one because the influence he has, where he kills Irene Adler at the beginning, the first half of the film, he sets that whole dinner date thing up just to kill her, and it's like all those people in that room. He claps his hand or whatever, and they all leave. And he poisons her.
That's chilling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because everybody in that room is working for him. That's what you realize at that moment, or they're mind controlled, whichever way you want to read it.
I'd rather see it as like he owns the restaurant, or he owns the guy who owns the restaurant, sort of thing. He has these enormous resources, and that's what makes him like it's less about like he is brilliant. But obviously, Holmes wins in the end, so Holmes is more brilliant than Moriarty. But it's more that he has these huge resources. Like, he can send, like, a team. Like, it's not just, like, 2 assassins to kind of come in on the train. He, like, basically buys the fucking train.
It's like a regiment of people.
Because, like, how do you kill... Like, he doesn't even know Holmes. Maybe he knows Holmes is going to show up. We could kind of talk about, like... But it's like, oh, I've got to kill Holmes's friend. Let's send in 50 guys.
Yeah.
Like that's his angle on this. Like, let's arm them with cutting edge military equipment because this is the only way we're gonna do this. Like, this isn't even Holmes. This is Holmes's buddy.
Yeah,
and this is the level of energy we have to give to this. Because
I gotta say, this is a much more satisfying Holmes on a train scene than him fighting with the King of Bohemia or whatever on the fucking top of the goddamn train car with swords.
Yeah. You raised the class thing. I think this does kind of pit Holmes and Moriarty in a kind of class battle in a way, because it acknowledges that Holmes is from privilege, right? Because the second film brings in Mycroft, and it shows you what is implied to be the family home, where Mycroft still lives and potters around naked.
Stephen Fry walking around naked.
Yeah.
God, that scene is like... It was kind of amusing in 2011 and 2019. It's like, this guy's going to get Me Too'd in like 8 seconds. Like, this is Harvey Weinstein like level of nonsense.
But he's the thing is, Mycroft is completely unconscious of any. He even gets that sort of line to Mary where he says, I've started to realize over the last few days that that a person might, in extremis, a chap might in extremis come to not entirely dislike being in the company of somebody of your gender and stuff like that. So this is obviously a guy who's, I don't know, he's gay or he's asexual or something, and or he's just got no idea. He's just a big kid, isn't he, Mycroft?
Yeah,
he's just a huge toddler, and he lives in their family seat, and he's got a butler follows him around, and this ancient butler that waits on him, and yet Holmes is obviously from the same place, but Holmes lives this very bohemian lifestyle, and he hangs out with the crooks and the guys at the bare knuckle fights and stuff like that, and so you've got Holmes who's kind of from the ruling class, but he's a dropout. He's chosen to move amongst, the people, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whereas you have Moriarty, who's very carefully shown in this to be embedded in King's College, Cambridge, and he's actually the Prime Minister's best friend, and he's invited to be at the peace conference by the government as an advisor. And as you say, he's got all these resources at his disposal. So the film does to the extent that it can, twist the character of Holmes in a class way. It does kind of do that, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it does. Yeah, no.
Holmes refused to be propped up by the system that would have propped up his talents and used them for their device.
Yeah, Holmes has a very ambiguous relationship with the authorities in these films, doesn't he?
Yeah,
there's no fondness between Holmes and Lestrade, really, and
no.
He turns down the opportunity to work for this quasi-Masonic order that basically apparently run the empire.
Yeah,
well, and the way the second film treats the anarchist movement is definitely sort of ambiguous in the sense that, like, oh, there are sort of people doing bombings and, like, this is bad.
Are these bombs supposed to be, like... remember in the first film, there's this whole plot point around the device that Blackwood is using. that was supposed to blow up Parliament and kill everybody. But it's not like really a bomb at the end of it. It's a time release like poison gas machine or whatever the fuck, right? Like that technology is never touched upon in the second film.
I don't think we're supposed to imply that these are like sort of like radio controlled bombs. I think this is I mean that's
because they make a point in the first film that Moriarty's interested in radio controlled devices like the burgeoning technology. Yeah.
Kind of just gets dropped. But it does tie in to an extent because what Moriarty's very interested in armaments, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, he becomes like, I just want to own the bombs and the bandages. I want to own the bullets and the bandages and the, But like, I find the sort of treatment of sort of the radical politics of the anarchist movement of the 1890s or whatever, sort of interesting here in the sense that like, at first it feels like they're going to do something. They're going to say like, oh well, these extremists or after. But then like once you actually meet one, it's like, no, we were just kind of subverted by this guy who offered us money and he gave us resources and then kind of took over the thing and then started threatening my family. And what the fuck else am I going to do?
Which happens.
And for a $100 million movie, I think that's amazing. Like
although
it's to the degree that it's inadequate. To the degree that it's inadequate, but like for a $100 million movie, that's way further than I expected it to go.
It does kind of sidestep the usual horseshoe theory thing, where the further left you go, the more on the right you are, and they become fanatical and they just slaughter everybody because they're fanatics. It doesn't quite do that. It shows the lead anarchist. He has that one scene where he's depicted with a fair amount of dignity, and it's like, as you say, it's like the anarchist cause has been corrupted by being bought out by this guy. And of course, Moriarty's relationship to the establishment or the forces of law and order it's very ambiguous because on the one hand, he is shown to be kind of part of it. As I say, he's a Cambridge Don and he's friends with the Prime Minister. But at the same time, he is outside the law and outside the forces of authority and, illegitimate. And that there's this kind of, this is in both the movies, actually. And this is a political point about the movies. They both kind of do this James Bond movie thing where the villain is somebody who does pretty much exactly what all corporations do or all governments do. It's just that when he does it, it's bad because he's the villain. He's not, he does basically what the British government does or the American government does or Shell does or whatever. But it's evil when he does it because he does it secretly behind the law, and he hasn't got the forces of legitimate authority on his side.
He's doing it against the interests of the empire.
And that's, I mean, you look at the first one, Blackwood is evil because he wants an empire. Well, Britain's already got an empire. He's standing in the Houses of Parliament, the seat of empire, saying, we're going to have an empire. And that's why the film's saying he's so evil because he wants to rule the world. Well, that's where you're standing is where the world is essentially run from at this point because they've already got an empire, And in the second film, you have the same thing happening again. It's like, isn't it awful? Moriarty wants to start a war and make loads of money from selling armaments. Well, that's as Moriarty kind of points out, that's what's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
Why is Moriarty evil and a villain? Because he's one guy trying to do something that all these various competing imperialist states and the capitalists that they represent are going to do anyway.
Yeah.
Really weird how this happens again and again in these sorts of films.
I do like that some of the gypsies, at least in this film, get some agency, although it goes into that expendable gypsy kind of trope for every film, and it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, you start killing them at the end. Like there's that whole scene at the end of the film there in the woods where they have that arterial barrage in the woods there where they're just start blowing, and like that would have killed all of them, by the way. Like if even a cannonball lands beside you being shot from a cannon, it's probably going to kill you. Just the actual pressures from it are going to kill you.
Yeah, if you watch the films back to back, it's kind of especially glaring because the first film actually shows reasonably accurate for this sort of film exactly that sort of thing happening. Because in the scene on the wharf where you get the explosions, see in slow motion, you see both Watson and then at another point Holmes and Adler being sort of blown backwards or blown sideways just by the force of the explosion pushing the air outwards. So when that doesn't then happen during a bit too long, I would say, chase through the woods, it's a bit jarring. But
because they all would have been turned into jelly. Like there's none of them are surviving. But
the other problem with that is that it does show you that there's a bit too much slow-mo in these films.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why the fight scenes do get a bit draggy is not so much that they happen too much, it's that just slow-mo happens too much generally. I think it would have been... Ritchie likes his slow-mo, doesn't he?
Can't help himself.
Yeah.
I guess, I do have a problem with Irene Adler being dropped so quickly in this film, but...
Yeah, that's a shame.
And then it takes like half the film for it to become really a sticking point with Holmes where, I'm doing this for Irene in some respect. When it's shown that they actually have some sort of love affair thing going on, and then it's kind of dropped all that. But at least they replace her with a really hot gypsy girl who does the action girl thing, or whatever. But still, I would have rather it just been like Irene Adler survives throughout the entire thing kind of deal, honestly. But
yeah, you could rewrite it so that it's Irene Adler's brother, and she and he were both members of an anarchist cell in New Jersey or something, couldn't you?
Because it feels like something she would do.
Yeah, but it does. I suppose it lends a bit of, because they're going for that very European feel to the second film, aren't they? So yeah, I understand why they did it. Bring in a new character, etc. Yeah.
One scene I want to point out here. So like the score for both of these films, which by the way, I think this is one of my favorite modern movie scores. Like between these two films, the Hans Zimmer shit. Like I think that's some of his best work.
No, it's great. It's in my head right now.
I love that he brings back Ennio Morricone's Two Mules for Sister Sarah in a sequence where they get the horses and they put Holmes on the donkey. And it's just a direct rip from Two Mules for Sister Sarah, and it's fucking amazing.
Is it? I didn't catch that.
Why would I want a being with intelligence writhing between my legs?
Yeah,
there's a whole thesis could be written about.
That's I mean, what's that? What is that line saying? Is that saying that he's asexual? Because that doesn't seem to. I mean, how do we read Holmes in these films? Because you can read him as asexual but with romantic feelings, or you can read him as bi and poly, kind of he wants to be in love with Watson and Irene Adler at the same time. His perfect setup would be those three living together. You can look upon what maybe a few years ago at the start of their partnership, he and Watson just used to fuck sometimes. Yeah, it was just a thing.
I mean,
or maybe you can also read this as like Watson is completely unconscious of that.
Yeah,
and he doesn't even get that Holmes is behaving like a jealous ex-wife.
Well, and Holmes as the sort of bohemian character, sort of, there's a moment where it's like Watson says, "Who taught?" Holmes says, "Who taught you to dance?" to Watson, like after Holmes has been leading Watson around the dance floor, and then Watson is like, "You did." Well, you had an excellent teacher. It's like, well, like, yeah, queer baity as fuck. Like it's practically text. It's practically text in this film.
And I was thinking back to Secret Life where Watson was dancing with the.
I just imagine like a scene that we never got to see where like Holmes taught Watson to dance. Like he said, like, look, you might have to like pretend to be a woman at some point. And you might have to dance. You might have to learn to dance as a woman. So I'm gonna sit here. We're gonna spend 4 hours, and we're gonna dance around my apartment. And I'm going to teach you to dance with me. And, like, it's totally just a code for, like, craving intimacy from Watson.
And you see, there might be some subtext here that we're not getting, like, the stuff you didn't see where Holmes has hit on Watson in the past and Watson just ain't into it. So he's just, but I still love you and you're still my friend. So I'm going to tolerate you hitting on me every once in a while, but I'm just going to do it with a little bit of a shrug, like, okay, you can fuck off now with that shit. We already talked about this. I'm not going to stick my dick in your ass. Get out of here with that stuff. And Holmes is still like, but come on, you want to. You really want to.
Yeah.
And then it gets really uncomfortable and it gets into consent stuff. And then it's like, yeah, no one ever thought about that when they were writing this film.
Or it could just be, you know, back in the early days of their friendship, 10 years ago, whatever it was, you know, if Watson's had enough to drink and Holmes has had enough cocoa leaves or whatever, you know, it's just a thing that happens every now and again.
Hey, it's college, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
Sometimes you just got to blow a buddy, you know. It's just a thing that happens, right? You know?
That's probably quite true to life for these guys like this. They spent an enormous amount of their time in homosocial environments, you know, college and school and the army and stuff. They spent a huge amount of their time just surrounded by other men. So I don't doubt that it happened all the fucking time.
How much of like frat guys like today kind of sitting around and like kind of talking about their penises and like pissing in front of each other and stuff? It's basically like this sort of veiled homoerotic stuff. Like there's no doubt that like there's a lot of that happens. I mean, the Victorian age, like we at least sort of like we in America sort of like tend to think of it as, you know, oh, stiff upper lip or whatever. But it's like beneath the surface, like this was the most pornified generation in history up to that point.
Oh God, yeah.
I mean, Victorian porn, like everything that you can see on the internet today, existed somewhere in London in 1890.
Hey, go watch Taste the Blood of Dracula again. You get a nice club with naked women with snakes on them and shit, and yeah, you could do that. And then Dracula shows up and goes, "They have destroyed my servant. Now they must be destroyed."
Which I care about for some reason.
Yeah, it's just
for
more
no
of a personal
particular
insult.
reason. I care about this
it's just
servant of mine, who clearly I have no particular relationship with, because I am very much a straight man with healthy, red-blooded, not American, because I'm clearly not American desires.
I'm Christopher Lee with a wig on that looks very, very convincing, but not so much so now that when someone saw me bald, they've now seen the line of my wig in every fucking movie they've watched since. That's not something that's happened to me.
I have never had a hard-on except in the presence of bountiful women. That is the only reason one would ever have a hard-on.
Yeah,
Taste the Blood of Dracula has no ulterior meaning.
Ralph Bates has no attraction for me whatsoever.
We are so far off field in this episode, but we're talking about movies that, like, hopefully everybody's seen.
This series has ruined Christopher Lee in a way for me. Like, I'm serious. Like, once we got to the point where I saw Christopher Lee fucking bald, and I learned that was his real hairline, I have watched 3 or 4 movies with Christopher Lee in it since, and I'm just seeing the fucking scalp line of the fucking wig he's wearing now. And I notice it every time now.
So you've lost all respect for him now that
he's terrible now. He's a terrible actor now. Yeah. I can't even watch him. No, it's just like, wow. I see him in total new light. I've known forever that Peter Cushing had the fucking wig on for like a good 30 years, like last 30, 40 years of his fucking career. But Christopher Lee, I never noticed, and now I do all the time.
You have a strange mind, Lee.
I'm sorry. It's just like, wow, those hair pieces are fucking immaculate. Like, they have, like, Burt Reynolds should have hooked up with the dude who did the hair pieces for them, man, because...
Well, it's kind of a tragic paradox, isn't it? Because Christopher Lee's hair pieces were so good that no follicularly challenged Hollywood actors like Burt Reynolds realized that he was wearing a hairpiece. If they had, they could have got in touch and said... Yeah. Tell me where you get yours, man. But they didn't know because it was so good. It's a catch-22 situation.
I like the idea of Burt Reynolds in like 1974 calling. Like, I see it as a text, even though it's 1974. A call on a big rotary phone, like with the dial. You know, you roll it around, and you call him up and go like, "So tell me where you get your hairpiece, man." That's what I see right now in my head. Did you get Christopher Lee giving him like a particular address in London and being like, you know, fuck that, I'm not flying over the Atlantic.
Yeah, no, Christopher Lee be like, which one were you again? Smokey or the Bandit?
No, thematically, I was both Smokey and the Bandit. That's what no one realized, you know.
Yeah, it's like when people don't realize Frankenstein is the creator, not the monster. It's the same thing. Yeah. No, I see it as a phone call where Burt Reynolds is on the phone with Christopher Lee and he says, "Where'd you get your piece, man?" And Christopher Lee misunderstands and he says, "Well, I like to read about Charlemagne and I like to read The Lord of the Rings. That's where I relax."
I'm going to record a heavy metal album about Charlemagne at some point.
Yes. and reminisce about snapping Nazis' necks during a World War.
Yeah, the real James Bond fucking snapping Nazis' necks. Yeah. Enough of these asides. I think it's fair to say we all like these two movies. I was about to say,
I like these.
We both these movies like that wasn't gonna come out very well.
I'm not sure the third one's gonna turn out without Guy Ritchie involved. Like if Guy Ritchie was involved, I'd be at least hypothetically interested in the third one. But without him, I don't know. Like I feel like it's just gonna be a pale retread. So
yeah, just leave it alone. Leave it alone. It's.
I mean,
the moment has passed. You know, it's done. They form a perfectly nice little 4-hour movie on their own. Just leave it alone.
Trivia for this one. I just pulled up this brief thing here. There was a bunch of people considered for Professor Moriarty. So like in the first film, it's not Jared Harris. It's just a shadowy character. Well, that's the rumor anyway. That was Brad Pitt's voice because they actually. I guess they went back and redubbed Jared Harris's voice over that, and I think for actual like subsequent releases of it on DVD and stuff. Apparently,
the version I have must be pre that because it's definitely not Jared Harris in the version of the first one I've got.
Because actually, the one I rewatched for this, it was Jared Harris. You could tell it was Jared Harris's voice, but Brad Pitt, Gary Oldman, Daniel Day-Lewis, Sean Penn, and Javier Bardem were considered for Moriarty.
Oh, no, I'm glad they chose Jared Harris because he's by far the best of all of those.
And he works so much because it's Jared Harris, even though, he is a recognizable actor. He's not nearly as recognizable as all those guys. And I think that would kind of be distracting from the part.
He's genuinely a better actor than most of them as well, I would say.
I would be really interested in Javier Bardem doing it, only if he does it in
No Country for Old Men.
No, I was going 100 Years of Solitude. That's where I was going.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, Moriarty goes around getting shopkeepers to flip coins to decide whether he kills them or not. Yeah.
Getting arms dealers to flip coins and then,
Yeah.
Killing people with like a pressurized tank thing with a hose.
Well, I mean, that goes into, you could kind of work that into the Sebastian Moran stuff. And also I like the Sebastian Moran in the second film too in this. Even though he's just kind of a thug who doesn't have any lines. He's a right bastard though. Like he's a fucking prick.
He's good.
He's a great secondary villain, and you can see him if they were going to make a third film.
Yeah, because he gets away.
Yeah,
he gets away. He'd be the villain of the third film.
Yep.
If that was going to happen properly and not the whatever bullshit they're going to give us.
Well, they might. I mean, if they might be, that might be the idea for.
I'm sure they will try.
It's going to be like The Empty House.
Hollywood, call us again. We say this in almost every episode these days. We can do this better. please give us a call.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So budget for the first was $90 million, and the box office was $524 million. So did fairly well. A budget for the second one was $125 million, and didn't do quite as well comparatively, but $545.4 million. So still really well.
Still, like these are among the most successful films we've covered on TMBDOS. Like that's we so often like spend our time in box office mediocrity, which is part of the joy of this.
If we can even get box office fucking it's like it made $30 in a drive-in.
It made 5 trillion Italian lira. That's the only information we have.
Yeah, but DVD stuff for this. Just go and look for it, because you can find both these films in multiple DVD and Blu-ray combination packs and releases.
The first one is on Netflix in the US right now.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up renting the sequel from Amazon because it was the easiest and quickest to like $3 purchase. So that's the way I watched these. But I'm sure they're both available in varying. These are recent films, so But if you are in the U.S., the first one is on Amazon. On Netflix. I said it twice. That's where
it's fine.
Yeah.
But
right now, go watch it. It's good.
Yeah, but yeah, this was absolutely a lot of fun. This little deep dive we did into Sherlock Holmes stuff.
I'm gonna miss not having a weekly Sherlock Holmes date with you all. Like it's gonna be a sad moment. My wife will appreciate having these evenings with me. To rewatch Mindhunter, apparently, because that's a thing that we've been doing. But it's been great.
Yeah, it's all right, Watson. You go off to your wife, Watson, and leave us behind.
Yeah.
I
suppose that makes
in this. That's fair.
That makes me Gladstone, doesn't it, in this scenario? Or Mrs. Hudson, maybe, I don't know.
But Lestrade, but the better Lestrade.
No, I tell you what, I pop in every now and again and beguile you. So I'm Irene Adler. I want to be Irene Adler.
Hey, that works. Yeah. Oh yeah, I also wanted to mention. I forgot. I was going to say something. Robert Mallet as Dredger, the big giant in the first film.
Oh yeah.
Former professional wrestler.
Oh really? I would never have guessed.
Canadian professional wrestler from here in the Maritimes too. By the way, the Acadian Giant, and he was
one
also
of your people. I get it.
Yeah, one of my people, I guess. Yeah, and apparently he actually legit knocked out Robert Downey Jr. in one of the fight scenes.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it.
I'm envious. I'd like to do that.
I mean, those sequences are like those fight sequences are pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
In the obviously there's CGI and there's fakery, there's like the stunt choreography and everything, but like this was in that era of like, no, we can do real fight choreography now. We've learned how to do this, and it's pretty great.
Yeah, the fight scenes. It's very much of its moment, but you can tell watching these movies that they're from 2009 and 2011 in all sorts of ways. But this is among the best. These are among the best examples of these sorts of things that they're very typical of.
Yeah, honestly, I find them way, like I was comparing them to the Pirates of the Caribbean films, way more rewatchable than those films. I find. And anyway. Jack,
I'd agree.
It was an absolute pleasure having you on for this series, and I mean, of course, you're always welcome back. Whatever.
Thank you. No, this has been great fun. I really enjoyed this, and I will pop back maybe quite soon. We'll see. But thanks for having me. It's been really interesting to see all sort of concentratedly watch these Holmes adaptations and see how the things that they have in common and the things that they differ in. It's been and of course it's been a lot of fun talking with you guys. Thanks very much.
Yeah. So where can people find you?
Okay, if you want to read my stuff, you can go to my blog, which is Shaboom Graffiti, which is spelt with one O for boring reasons, which is part of Eruditor and Press. If you Google either of those phrases, you will find me. Easier still is to go to my Twitter, which is @Jack_Graham_. You will find updates about everything I do there, including the podcast I'm currently doing, I Don't Speak German, which I do with an obscure person. I don't know if you've heard of him, called Daniel Harper.
Yeah, and of course we've linked Jack's details before in previous episodes. What I'm going to link this time in this episode in the show notes is the short story that you have written and just recently published on your blog, which is excellent. It's a really good little ghost story.
Thank you so much.
And I'm not even just saying this because you're a friend and everything, but I do read a lot of short horror stories, and this is one of the best short horror stories I've read in quite a few years. So
wow.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I blush.
And Daniel, where can people find you?
I do a podcast. You might have heard of it called I Don't Speak German with somebody who you might have also heard of named Jack Graham. I don't write short horror stories. Instead, I probe the...
He lives a long horror story.
Yeah.
I live a long horror story in which terrible people threaten to burn my house down. And, we shouldn't talk about that on this podcast. Yeah. That's probably not the place to do that. But you can find that at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com. You can find me on Twitter at Daniel Lee Harper. I am closing in on 4,000 followers. It would be really nice to get there soon if people wanted to do that. But,
yeah, I'm lagging way behind with just over 3,000. So help me catch up with Daniel because he's insufferable at the moment.
Yeah, the guy never shuts up about it.
Yeah, it turns out when Nazis threaten to burn your house down, and then somebody writes an article about you, you gain a lot of Twitter followers in that moment.
Yeah, some people have all the luck.
Yeah. And you can find us at tmbdos.podbean.com, where you can find our Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Facebook links. Facebook group is the best way to get in contact with us. Give us recommendations. The next few episodes are going to be recommendations from Jeff Williams. So, I mean, if you're prolific enough in doing recommendations, then you might get a month of your own. Where
give us 100 recommendations, and we'll do 8 of them.
Yeah.
So the next little while is going to be They Must Be Destroyed on Sight, a game of Jeff Williams.
Yes. And actually the next episode, when we do it, whenever it shows up, is going to be This Gun for Hire from 1942 and Woman They Almost Lynched from 1953. So we're going to do 2 films in that. And then we're going to go back and forth, 2 films, 1 film, 2 films, 1 film, and that's going to be our Jeff Williams series. For now, anyway. But yeah. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you guys for joining me. It was a great pleasure to do this series with you, Jack, and it was just a lot of fun. We're not going to be doing a Sherlock Holmes podcast, but I would not be opposed to coming back to this somewhere down the road and hey, let's do a couple more Sherlock Holmes films. And
I would love to do that. Yeah, it would be great.
Yeah,
I'd be well up for that. So yeah, great,
awesome. All right, again, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again when we see you. Bye-bye. You have been listening to They Must Be Destroyed on Sight. For other episodes, our links to Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and our Facebook group, as well as links to podcasts and websites of similar interest, please visit us at tmbdos.podbean.com. Thank you. Drive through.
If you don't want it to make it something you tackle.
Hush! 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 Nobody loves you. Yeah, nobody loves you. Hush!
What have you done to Gladstone, Daniel?
You killed the dog again.
Ruthie!